Heaven sent.
Now, it's without a doubt that we love to cover a wide range of topics here on the channel, but given the fact that I'm perpetually stuck in the wonderful days of my youth, I often like to revisit the things that made these days so special. And when reminiscing on those many days I would come home from school, make myself a turkey, cheddar, and potato chip sandwich, then plop myself on the couch for some TV time, the first channel I would immediately tune into would be none other than MTV. At this time in the channel's history, the variety of content they were dishing out was completely unpredictable. I mean, MTV was like the hub for all things cool. You could catch up on the latest tunes, join them for some bikini-clad spring break coverage, or even enjoy some trashy reality TV, all in one place. MTV's influence on the young culture at that time was second to none, leading to a steady rise in viewers that only seemed to keep progressing with every passing year. But what good is an American success story if they don't try to dip their toes in every market possible? And with video games being such a popular medium for many of their audience, they thought, oh, what the hell, we're music f***ing television. Let's make some games. And so, they did that. And my nostalgia-riddled brain thought it would be a fun idea to dig up some of these old games and give them a spin for this video. So if that sounds any fun to you, please join me as we dive into the strange and purely obscure world of MTV Games, featuring a guest appearance from none other than Carson Daly. Just kidding. We don't have the budget for that. So grab your favorite flavor of Capri Sun and give your channel surfing finger a little rest, because we've got some exploring to do. Yo dog, I heard you like video games, so we put a game in your game so you can play while you play. Maybe scratch that. Now if there's one statement that I can fully stand by, it's that early 2000s television was absolutely batshit crazy. And although it's still very common to find some oddball media in all of our social media platforms and websites of present day, these wacky TV programs of the past were actually being backed by millions of dollars, as well as the reputation of an entire station being at stake. So for lack of a better term, this time period was like the Wild West for television. With MTV being at the helm for all things unhinged, the television series of Pimp My Ride fits snugly into their weekly roster. Now I'm sure all of my fellow old heads can recall just how insanely ridiculous this show actually was, but for those who are still sipping mama's milk during TV time with X to the Z, let me briefly catch you up to speed. Basically, Pimp My Ride was a show hosted by West Coast rapper Exhibit, in which hopeful contestants would send in photos of their beaten up rides in hopes of having their vehicle pimped out. And I'm not talking about the skinny mane version of pimping either. We're talking about turning these rides into some of the most ridiculous creations you've ever seen. And although it's an incredibly strange concept, its unpredictable nature and unshakable charm kept the show at a steady rise for multiple seasons. But anyways, with the success of the show and MTV's love for all things money, they thought it'd be a great idea to turn the concept of this show into its very own video game. And for the sake of entertainment, they were going to have to make some bold choices. I mean, after all, you're not just watching the show anymore, now you get to play it. So, how'd it turn out? Well, for the sake of this video, I took it for a spin, presenting me with one of the strangest experiences in gaming I've had in quite some time. The game begins much akin to the show, with our boy X to the Z Exhibit explaining that it's time for us to pimp some rides. And after that, you'll hit the road to earn the money needed to supply this car with all of its incoming upgrades. And how you earn the money, you may ask? The same way that any hardworking citizen does, of course, with mini games. Now this is one of the biggest downfalls of the game, given the fact that there's only about 3 different mini games to partake in, from ghost riding the whip at a dance-off, collecting cash bonuses that are spread about the map, to slowly driving by a crowd and hitting time button presses. Yeah, really exciting stuff. So when it comes to the minigame selection, underwhelming would be an understatement. As we had previously mentioned though, completing these tasks are essential in gaining the funds necessary to trick these cars out to their full potential. And while you would think that the car customization would be the high point in this game, even that seems to lack any sort of decent variety. You're pretty much given the choice of a few different options depending on the category, with the star rating system being used to show how well you've customized the car to the owner's liking, which at that point their car is somehow mysteriously duplicated by a rival company and is now your competition in completing the challenge. I mean, it's par for the course in a game that is so chock full of silliness to begin with, but the sheer laziness in this game is just too much to overlook when giving it a play. I mean, for a game about customization, you would think they would have focused a lot more on giving their players free reign to create some unique concepts, but the game is really just a mediocre attempt at following in the show's footsteps. Not to mention, it may have just been my emulator bugging out, but these visuals are horrendous. I mean, that lighting has to be some kind of a glitch, right? But anywho, we shouldn't let such a bombastic game forsake the legacy of one of television's most ambitious ideas, because I, for one, loved the show back in the day. But in the vein of getting back to the roots of MTV, how about we focus on the music side of things for this next entry? So let's get ready to turn up our cans and break out the turntables, because we're about to make some pure magic. One of the best things about making videos for YouTube is the fact that I get to put y'all on to a plethora of great songs that I use for my videos. But if you're wondering where this funky track that you're hearing right now came from, it's funny you should ask, because I actually made it myself using the MTV Music Generator. And even though the series eventually came to bear the MTV name, it actually began in Europe as a series known simply as Music. It all started with Tim Wright, a composer best known for his works in the game Wipeout 2097, who had decided to create a studio named Jester Interactive and make a game in which players would compose their own music, all from the comfort and convenience of a home console. The interest in such a game soon reached overseas, and Jester decided to capitalize on their newfound success by quickly firing up a sequel. And that's when North America was finally able to get their hands on the MTV Music Generator. And while it is technically a video game, it's actually much more than that. The main screen is composed of 24 different channels, offering you the ability to choose from a massive library of pre-made sounds for stringing together melodies. And if that wasn't enough, the interface also gives you the ability to edit your own visuals to match your creations. Pretty cool stuff. And as someone who used to dip their toes into the world of music production, I gotta say, they did a pretty great job of making an entry-level DAW program. The game also included a very unique multiplayer option, in which up to 4 players could team up and work on a track as a unit, which I can only imagine how unbelievably fun that would have been with your friends back in the day. So if any of y'all got to play this game back then with some friends, let me hear your stories, please, because I'm definitely jealous. But anyways, going back to the critical success of its sequel, the music IP had officially been taken over by the MTV name, and decided to take their turntable spinning gameplay to the next generation of consoles. MTV Music Generator 2 was officially released in 2001, and this time around came with a few more bells and whistles. The interface itself had undergone a bit of a transformation, but still provided players with a simple cut and paste method of stitching together creations. And while the primary focus of the game was on creating your own tracks, the sequel also included a humble selection of 14 different licensed songs, to which you could add your own creative flair to. But other than that, it was everything that people loved about the original, only on a brand new console. The third entry in the series had came not too long after, this time around boasting a new developer by the name of Mixmax and dropping for both the PlayStation 2 and original Xbox. Only in this sequel, they wanted to put more emphasis on the remixing capabilities of the interface and include a roster of some of MTV's hottest artists of that time, giving players the ability to dissect and modify new versions of these included tracks, which makes for some endless fun in remixing. But not only that, they also include a really cool feature that allows you to upload and rip samples from your very own CD collection. Not to mention, the UI is by far the most user-friendly. It's a controversial opinion as to which of these games in the series is truly the best, but if you ask me, every single one of them are excellent. It's honestly one of the better series that can be found in the history of MTV's gaming resume, and it's a game that's more than worthy of your time if you have any interest at all in music. But enough on that, as it's time for us to begin moving on to our next entry for this video. So I thought we should turn up the volume and prepare to get a little more extreme. So strap on your knee pads and get ready for some big air, because we are about to go the distance. When looking back on some of the greatest trends of the early 2000s, the presence of extreme sports were nothing short of overwhelming in almost every realm of the media. From shopping mall mannequins being dressed for a day at the skate park, X Games coverage being at its absolute peak, to the unbelievable success of the Tony Hawk series, the world had found itself completely infatuated with the culture of extreme sports, and MTV were no stranger in broadcasting these celebrated events for the world to enjoy. As a matter of fact, you could even argue that they were ahead of the trends. All beginning with the 1992 series of MTV Sports, a show that was dedicated to showcasing the world of radical and extreme sports, as well as sitting down and talking to those who do them professionally. It was a really dope show for its time, and I highly recommend checking out some of the recovered episodes that are scattered around the interwebs. But anyways, MTV was doing its extreme sports thing for quite some time. With the presence of these trends heavily ramping up towards the end of the 90s into the 2000s, it began to make a heavy impact on their future programming. With their toes being firmly dipped into the gaming gene pool, why not spread their love for such activities into a gaming series of their very own? And so, they did just that, and boy was I excited to give them a try. I first started with MTV Sports Skateboarding, featuring Andy McDonald. This was a PlayStation title that was released roughly 1 year after Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, and as you can imagine, was heavily influenced by it. Now the cover art really piqued my interest, given the fact that it featured some dope aesthetics and what seemed to be an amazing soundtrack. But upon firing this game up for a quick skate, I soon found that the soundtrack was going to be the only decent part of my experience. The controls were beyond stiff, kind of like your character is on rails or something. Which, speaking of rails, good luck landing any tricks on them in this game, as the balance mechanic is assigned to the same buttons used to spin your character, with the controls having some sort of delay to them. Coming out of a grind sideways to a face plan is usually par for the course. Now the vision is something I can appreciate, as the level designs, character models, and overall vibe are exactly what I would ask for from a game of this era. But there is one cool feature they included, being music videos that sync up to the in-game soundtrack, and are cleverly showcased throughout each level. And after finding my new favorite Deftones song from sitting and playing this game, I gotta show my appreciation for such a little feature. Overall the game plays like Pro Skater with a broken controller, but I still give it a little bit of credit for the effort. Also, the game features Rob Dyrdek as the very first character in the selection screen, which will also tie into a later realization that we have on this list. Wink wink. While this was my first dive into the 4-game series of sports titles that they put out, I'm surprised to report that the other 3 were actually much better. Next, I fired up MTV Sports Pure Ride, a snowboarding game that was developed by Radical Entertainment and released for the Sony PlayStation. In my opinion, this game was a real treat, and even comparing it to the likes of classics such as Cool Boarders, the gameplay is incredibly fluid. It almost feels like a PS1 version of SSX in many ways. First off, the overall design of this game really scratches an itch for me, as it's got that perfect 2000s aesthetic and some really comforting design choices. While the majority of the game plays in somewhat of a competition mode, there's also a decent variety of other game modes to enjoy, as well as a track editor. But going back to the main competition mode, that's where the game truly shines. Rather than the typical racing formula of games such as Cool Boarders or 1080, Pure Ride is all about the style and flow of your run. So in short, you're looking to get big air and pull some even bigger tricks. Variety is the key in racking up a decent score, which in turn will progress you throughout the game's so-called story section. There's also a fair bit of customization that can be assigned to your character of choice, with a handful of unlockables and gear to farm for. Plus, it doesn't hurt that the soundtrack is chock full of bangers. I was honestly pleasantly surprised by Pure Ride, given the fact that the skateboarding game was such a letdown. But after enjoying this game, I was a little confused about playing MTV Snowboarding. Like, I almost wondered if they were the same game. But upon further research, I realized that they were released an entire year apart from each other, and both sharing the same dev and publishing studios. So I was expecting much of the same experience I had gotten from Pure Ride, but maybe much less. But in all honesty, I think I liked MTV Snowboarding just a tad bit more. Starting with the cinematic style of camera they used. I mean, just look at how stylish this subtle change in framing is for your tricks. While a lot of games in this genre made use of a more static type of camera, this almost looked like something you would see from a snowboarding game of the next gen. The soundtrack is obviously amazing, given the fact that MTV did a great job in supplying all these games with great tunes, But the inclusion of one of my favorite bands ever, Incubus, really sold me on the opening cutscene. Lastly, the career mode is stacked with a pleasant variety of different competitions to compete in. Whether it's freestyle halfpipe to downhill racing, there's plenty of fun to be had no matter what type of competition you're in for. It's honestly one of the better snowboarding games I've ever played, and I was incredibly impressed with the quality of both MTV Snowboarding and Pure Ride. But for the last sport in their Extreme series, we move on to MTV Sports BMX, featuring TJ Lavin, who is also the host of MTV's The Challenge to this very day. Beginning to see a bit of a pattern here? Now, as somebody who played a lot of Dave Mirra and Matt Hoffman on the PS1 back in the day, it's obvious that MTV wasn't going to outdo the GOATs in this situation. But given the fact that I've found myself playing this game all the way through, I can confidently say that it stands on its own two wheels. The game offers 3 different modes, being Pro Circuit, Practice, and 2-player. The Pro Circuit mode is your standard, complete the list of challenges and move on to the next level type of stuff, while Practice is essentially a free mode, allowing you to sharpen up your moveset and get a feel for the mechanics. The gameplay itself is quite fluid, and I found myself picking up on things a lot easier than expected. While the character models do look a bit goofy, they have a certain charm to them, and the level design was something I was even more smitten with. Plus, it's got a mall level, and you guys already know how I feel about that. All in all, the MTV Sports series of games are a lot better than I had expected, and as someone who enjoys collecting games from this genre, I think I'll be adding them to my physical collection very soon. But I think we've spent long enough on the subject of MTV Sports, and I guess it's time that we move on to our next entry, which if you were as much of an MTV head as I was, this one is sure to stir up some serious nostalgia. So without further ado, let's begin our journey into the wacky world of MTV video mods. Have you ever wondered what it would look like to see your favorite video game characters in the band? Well, back in the Wild West of television, this curiosity had soon become a reality. It all dates back to the inception of MTV2, given the fact that MTV was beginning to shift their focus of programming options into much more than just music. They decided it would be best to create a secondary channel and solely dedicate all of its programming to music. But that's not to say it was going to be a never-ending flow of only music videos. I mean, they gotta spice things up a little, right? Going back to 2003, a man by the name of Tony Schiff had an idea for combining both video games with the hottest songs of that era. After pitching this idea to MTV execs, they decided to give it a shot and partnered with Electronic Arts in supplying them with a roster of games to work with. The pilot included characters from SSX3, The Sims 2, and Need for Speed Most Wanted. And I know I can't be the only one who remembers Zoe from SSX rapping to Missy Elliott. Video mods were basically machinimas, but on the TV rather than YouTube. And it's honestly the most 2000s thing I've probably ever seen. The pilot had garnered some serious interest, and MTV2's head of programming were keen to continue producing them on the channel. They eventually came to release 2 seasons worth of content, and over 40 different videos with a huge selection of characters from many games. My personal favorite being a Blood Rain rendition of Everybody's Fool by Evanescence. Rain is such a hottie. And although it was a short-lived moment in television history, its memory has luckily been archived on YouTube for our viewing pleasure. I mean, it's kinda sad to see such a cool program go, but it only makes sense that it eventually fizzled out. But for our next entries, I thought we'd revisit 2 separate games I had covered in my Attitude Era video. So for the first one, you might want to ready your jockstrap and prepare yourself for some major pain in the 2007 release of Jackass, the game.
Hi, I'm Johnny Knoxville, and this is the Cub Test.
When journeying back to the roots of our topic of discussion, MTV had a huge part in escalating the Attitude Era movement. From the antics of controversial artists such as Eminem and Marilyn Manson, to the obscene amount of reality TV on broadcast, MTV was loaded with everything you could ever ask for in terms of crude subject matter. But with the introduction of the Jackass series, MTV had officially become the stomping grounds for edgelords around the world. And if you ever told me that I was going to be watching grown men giving each other nut taps and huffing each other's farts on cable television, I'd probably call you crazy. But luckily for 10-year-old me, I was just in time to bear witness to American television at its finest. And with such a high demand for content of its nature, Jackass was a knockout hit, almost instantly. Ratings were high, the show was a massive success, and emergency rooms across the globe just couldn't keep up with all the amateur stuntmen this show began to spawn. The entire world was in awe at the shocking and outright stupidity of the Jackass crew, but much like a speeding train colliding with a nursing home, you just couldn't look away. So what better way to cash in on the success of the Jackass series than by creating a video game about it? Well, they did just that, but was it just as good as the show? That depends on how you look at it. Beginning with the game's narrative, the plot begins with the series director, Jeff Tremaine, severely injuring his manberries, so much so that it's now up for you to direct the upcoming season. Each chapter of the game is presented in episodes, with each episode giving you a selection of stunts to choose from, all with their own set of unique goals. The more goals you achieve in your stunt, the more revenue you take in. The more money, the higher your ratings, ensuring that the Jackass series will continue to live on. Now I'm sure you're all wondering as to what kind of stunts you'll be pulling in your playthrough, as sniffing butts isn't the most stimulating of activities for a video game. Well, they basically take an inspiration from a good bit of different stunts that were performed in the show, and ramp them up to an outrageous degree. So much so that you'll be practically murdering your castmates in every film session. From human pachinko, skyscraper chicken fights, to explosive golf, the majority of the stunts play out like your typical party game, with a lot of the minigames being reminiscent of something you would play in a Mario Party. The typical toilet humor and personality from the TV show is in full swing, but due to the game's somewhat awkward presentation, it doesn't carry over too well in virtual form. A lot of the voice acting is poorly recorded, and even the animations can be downright weird at times. But it's obvious they weren't looking to win any awards or anything with this type of game. It felt more so like a nod to the fans of the series, and in that respect, I think they did a pretty good job. I found myself having a really good time in revisiting this game after many years, but couldn't help but to remember how much more fun it is to enjoy with your friends. Which, I guess the same could be said in watching the show. While the Jackass series was incredibly crude and sometimes vomit-inducing, it's one of those shows that truly defined an era of pure mayhem, and for me personally, was a staple for my childhood friends and I. There was an amazing sense of camaraderie among this large group of village idiots, and the Jackass game is yet another example of its influence on the early 2000s culture. But for the next game on our list, we're going to be revisiting one of MTV's most controversial programs in history. And for this one, you might need a stronger stomach. So without further ado, let's grease up the turnbuckles and get ready to tango in MTV's Celebrity Deathmatch. Have you ever wondered what it'd be like to watch Marilyn Manson drag Lance Bass into the seedy depths of hell? Or how about a front seat view to Mr. T giving Busta Rhymes an off-the-cuff lobotomy? If so, then boy do I have the game for you. As we had previously mentioned, MTV was a hotbed for edgy content in the early 2000s. Along with these trends spawned the memorable variety of satirical cartoons and animated parodies, often regarded as adult cartoons. These animated series were all meant to be viewed by a mature audience, and would often poke fun at real-life events. This type of comedy had become incredibly popular with teens and young adults at the time, and with shock value being so profitable for many cable networks, what better way to shock and humor your audience than by creating a show in which celebrities tear each other limb for limb. Celebrity Deathmatch was the result of these far-out concepts, and with little to no restraint, they aimed to shock the world in ways an animated show had never done before. But we're not here to discuss this program in full detail by any means, as its demon spawn of a video game is going to be our next topic. But with the foundation for raunchy humor and hilarious combat being so perfectly laid out in the TV show, it's no sweat that the game will be equally as entertaining, right? Not exactly. Let's begin with the roster of characters. The game features 21 different celebrities in which you can fight to the death, including familiar faces such as Jerry Springer, Dennis Rodman, or Carmen Electra, which as you can tell, the 90s were really showing face in this game's lineup, as well as a few different creature feature characters like the Mummy being thrown in for good measure. There are two different modes to play through, one being episode mode and the other a selection of quick modes and matches to create. But even that sad little variety isn't enough to change any of this game's mediocre formula. The gameplay is simple. Just spend your time mashing one or two buttons, filling up your special move meter, and pressing it for an equally mediocre viewing experience. Wow, so exciting. With the only thing keeping the matches interesting being a variety of random objects and power-ups for torturing your opponent. I mean, watching Ron Jeremy take a missile to the face from Anna Nicole Smith is something you won't see every day, but with a less than inspired selection of moves and brain-dead AI, the game just turns out to be a gory snooze fest. Your first few matches or so will seem pretty entertaining, with the usual commentators making their off-color remarks and funny one-liners. This quickly becomes repetitive, often resulting in the same jokes being thrown at you over and over again.
This fight just got as ugly as my sister.
If I had to give praise to anything, it would be the visuals, as the claymation style of the show really carried over well to console. Celebrity Deathmatch was without a doubt a massive part of what made this era so memorable for edgy content, but the game showed that it was much better to be viewed rather than played, which is probably why it wasn't very well received with critics, either. But that's not to say it didn't deserve a spot in this video, because if Celebrity Deathmatch is good at one thing, it's being extreme. And for the last game of this video, I thought we could revisit probably the most obscure of all games that were ever released from MTV's catalog. But for this one, we're gonna have to journey back to the year of 1994 in the virtual interactive CD-ROM of MTV's Club Dead. A lot of things interest me when it comes to video games, but some of the most intriguing of topics are in the form of lost media. Lost media is often regarded as something in audio or visual form that is no longer accessible to the public, and while it's not entirely impossible to find a copy of this next game in our list, it's definitely one of the most obscure pieces of digital media I've ever come across, which really came to bite me in the ass when I scoured the internet in search of info on such a game. And from what little I've been able to find, the game is about as bizarre as they come. MTV's Club Dead was released on the operating system of DOS, as well as Mac in 1994. It was said to be a surreal sci-fi first-person adventure game, assuming the role of Sam Frost, a man who had recently been released from prison and has been hired to investigate a series of bizarre deaths that are taking place in a mysterious hotel. You'll scour the looping corridors and busy elevators in search of clues to this macabre mystery. The game also takes place in a dystopian cyberpunk type of setting, with plenty of 90s cheesy goodness to complement such an atmosphere. And from what I've been able to gather in my research, it played much more like an interactive film rather than an actual video game. The program is essentially a series of QuickTime videos that play out in the order of the choices you make, and boy, can some of these be bizarre. I mean, you see what I'm talking about? But what's kinda hilarious is the fact that this game was actually the acting debut for both Kate Walsh and Nick Offerman. And my word, how far they have traveled since. It's honestly an incredibly charming piece of work, and really teleports you back to that strange era of film and television at that time. But truthfully, if they would have just focused more on taking these cutscenes and releasing them as a full-length film, I could have seen it becoming somewhat of a cult classic. But for those interested in checking the game out for themselves, it takes quite a few hoops to maneuver through in order to get it running on modern hardware. But if you find yourself craving some mid-90s sci-fi slop, MTV's Club Dead is sure to satiate those nostalgic cravings. But that's all for now, folks, and I hope you guys had a great time going back into the wild history of MTV gaming. Before I go, I gotta give a shout out to all my patrons, that being AJ Place, Michael Loftman, Niku Nicole, Riley McFadden, Sage, and Star95. You guys rock, and I really appreciate all your extra support. So I hope you guys have been enjoying the bonus content I've been posting on there. Also, shout out to you, the viewer, for watching this video, as well as all of you wonderful people who believe in this channel. We've just reached our goal of 15K subscribers, and I'm really hoping we can make it to 20 by the end of the summer. But until next time, my name is Vincent. I hope to see you all in the next video, and please, take care guys. Peace out, and stay blessed.
Heaven sent.